I had a terrible cut this week. I cut the tip of my left thumb with a knife.
Nice.
Oh, I thought you meant like you cut something out of the show last week and you weren't pleased about it. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. That's
cut something out of his finger and he wasn't pleased with it.
Yeah, well, yeah, fair enough.
Well, so the problem with cutting the tip of your left thumb is that, well, that's my phone thumb. Like, because I'm a left-hander, so like already now using my phone through like, a Band-Aid.
Capacitive Band-Aids?
Yeah, well, I mean, it works. It just works terribly.
Yeah.
And so there's like, first of all, the entire left half of the phone keyboard when typing text on the phone, that is now horrendous. And so I mostly just have to use the other hand. And then trying to navigate the phone, because I'm a left-hand phone user, that left thumb is my dominant phone, like one-hand navigation finger. So that's a mess. And then I got to my Mac, and that's the command key thumb.
Oh, yes, that's true.
I could switch which side is a space bar. I don't care about that. But that I can deal with. But I can't switch the side of the command key.
Yeah, I would die.
Oh my God. I thought about it. I'm just, this is it. I'm like, should I go on vacation? I don't know. Like, I can't do anything. Fortunately, I have now downgraded to a thinner bandage as the cut heals, and I'm almost out of this national nightmare. But man, there is no worse like finger to have a cut than your left thumb when you are a Mac user.
Oh, gracious. That is no fun. Yeah. And it's so funny. I'm a pretty good typist. I'm not going to sit here and say we did the typing test like 2 or 3 years ago. I forget which one of us was fastest, but I'm pretty good. I'm no Jason Snell, but I'm pretty good. But you ask me to spacebar with my left thumb or command with my right thumb, I'm sorry, gun to my head, I guess I'm going to get shot because I'd be doomed. I cannot do it.
I don't think, looking at my keyboard and trying to like use muscle memory, I don't think I have ever used my right command key.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have either.
Command period you have.
Oh yeah, you're right.
No, yeah, I guess that's true. Other than that, though.
Yeah.
All right, let's do some follow-up. And we have a lot of chatter, as I would expect, about Overcast transcriptions. And first of all, I'd like to say a thanks to the people who reached out and said that was a really good episode/segment. I'd like to congratulate you, maybe, or thank you, Marco, for doing such a good job telling that whole story, because I was riveted. There's a lot of times that maybe not as much, John, but certainly I will play up the ignorant card just to move the show along, something that we've talked about a few minutes before to set up a joke or something, and oh, really? Tell me more about that. But this is one of those scenarios where John and I, or at least I presume John also, had no freaking clue that this is where that story was going, which on the one side is a little frustrating because, I want to be along for the ride with my friend. But on the other side, made for excellent programming. So this is a sacrifice we make in our mutual friendships for you, the listener. You're welcome. But all kidding aside,
this is why I can do things like set up an entire data center worth of Mac Minis without ever telling you guys.
Right,
the only person who knew about all this stuff as it was happening, I told Underscore. Because
okay, that's right.
That was we kept it private. We both had a lot of fun, anticipating like when you guys would finally find out about it. But yeah, and it's like when I bought the restaurant, I didn't tell anybody on the internet because it's like, well, this is, and it's only because like, oh, this is going to make for a fun ATP when I finally spring it on you guys live.
Yep, and that did as well.
Like when John quit his job.
Also true. Yeah. So we are terrible friends, but we make for pretty good ho-hosts is what I'm hearing. But anyway, I'm getting on a tangent. But what I was trying to say, all snark and jokes aside, is that we really do appreciate all the positive feedback. So thank you.
Right.
Now,
and tell your nerdy friends about the episode. This is a good episode. It seems like a good episode to introduce people to the show. You can give them a timestamp link to the segments. They don't have to hear all our BS before and after it. Spread the word.
Yes, please do. So, all right. With that said, let's talk some follow-up. First of all, how is it, Marco, that you had never seen a data center before? You worked for Tumblr and were kind of their infrastructure or IT person for years. What gives, man?
Yeah, so this was a question posed on the Overcast Reddit. For people who kind of aren't in this world or maybe are in a different part of this very large world, it might have seemed ridiculous that I would have operated Tumblr for its first 4 years and never had been in a data center before. And the reason why is because during those 4 years, it was 2006 to 2010, Tumblr didn't have its own data center. What we did was, this was very early in AWS. EC2 didn't exist for at least the very beginning of that. But what we had instead, what people did back before compute instances, which used to be called VPSs, or virtual private servers. But what we all did before VPSs was dedicated servers. So what this is now in the business, I believe they now call this bare metal servers. You go to a hosting company on the internet and you just lease a server, through their web interface or their salespeople or whatever. And you have a server allocated to you that you never see. You never deal with the physicality of it. They deal with it, but, and you have to do things like, put in like a RAID controller and make sure you have multiple disks. And if one fails, either they're monitoring or you're monitoring, we'll have to tell somebody, hey, go replace this disk. And, you have to deal with stuff like that. Your server can break and you're out of the stuff. If you don't have it backed up, too bad. There is not much of a concept of like upgrading to a different server, because you can copy the data off yourself and copy it onto a new server, but the concept we have now of like instances that it can be resized, like that didn't exist. Very little concept of like managed images and stuff like that. But this is how servers were run by many people at that time at this scale. At that time, it wouldn't have made any sense for us to buy to have our own data centers or our own racks and data centers. So we started off, the first few years of Tumblr were on most of the time we were on 2 servers, maybe up to 6 or 8 at by the end of the second year or something like that. I put the timeline all in there. That's what they were. They were dedicated servers, and that's what everyone did before AWS EC2 and before compute instances, virtual instances, things that we use now. And again, that world still does exist. It's called bare metal servers, but I think it's a lot less of the business now than it used to be.
Excellent. No, I found this Reddit explanation absolutely fascinating, so I'm glad you took the time to write it and explain it here. A bunch of people have asked this, including Matt King. How do you handle podcasts that include their own transcripts? Because this was like a year or two ago that this started to be a thing. There was I don't know how the RSS about podcasts works, but there was like an enclosure or something that you could do to save me some from myself.
Yeah. The podcast 2.0 spec people defined a transcript tag, like a podcast :transcript tag years ago. It can point to, for an episode, a SRT or WebVTT file. And when Apple Podcasts launched their transcripts, whatever that was, a year and a half, 2 years ago, they said, okay, well, we will do our own transcripts, but if you want to supply your own, we will obey this tag. If you use this tag in your feed, the podcast transcript tag, we will show that, I think instead, not in addition to, but I haven't actually tested it. And the reason I haven't actually tested it is that very, very few podcasts so far actually do this. Not none, but not a lot. So I didn't feel that it was necessary for my first beta release. I am in the process of building in the architecture to support that. So I do plan to show transcripts from people's podcast transcript tags from SRT and WebVTT files if they are present. I haven't quite decided though. So one of the problems is if you include your own transcript, first of all, you then cannot use dynamic ad insertion because your timestamps will be all messed up. And there is not a well-supported standard to embed a transcript in a file that any podcast app would include. Now, there actually is an old MP3 ID3 tag, I think USLT off the top of my head, but there actually is, or no, that's unsynced, I think SLT, whatever it is. One of those tags is an ID3 tag to specify time-synced captions to be displayed. So that feature exists in the MP3 ID3 spec, but I don't know of anything that uses it. So if you were to support like podcaster supplied transcripts with dynamic ad insertion, something like that comes with the file and therefore can be adjusted with the file whenever they insert and remove ads, that would be the only way to really do that. But given that these platforms don't even, like the DAI platforms, don't even support chapters, which work the same way, I'm not holding my breath on that. I think that's very unlikely for any of them to ever do. So because DAI platforms generally won't or can't do that, and because almost all podcasts of medium to large size now are monetized with DAI, I can't imagine that podcaster-supplied transcripts are ever going to be that big of a thing. Now, this could be wrong, and another thing they could do is they could supply a transcript with timestamps that just don't include any ads, but then the real-time display of it will break in the player. Like, because if their transcript is just their content and doesn't have any of the ad content in it, which it wouldn't in this context, as soon as you reach a point in the show where they've inserted an ad for, say 2 minutes, from that point forward, all of the timestamps in their supplied transcript will be off by 2 minutes. And so the utility of that, I think, is always going to be significantly less than one that was dynamically generated in such a way that it can synchronize itself back to the ad-inserted version of the podcast that you downloaded. So in that way, I think my transcripts are probably going to provide more functionality than many supplied transcripts will. Because basically, yeah, if you supply a transcript and you have dynamic ads inserted, that's not going to play well together. So even if you supply your own, I haven't fully made this decision yet, but I think even if you supply your own, I think I should probably also offer mine and maybe just have a tab picker at the top of the screen that says, my transcript, their transcript, something like that. Because I think if I don't do that, people might be disappointed if they are supplied a transcript that has less functionality than my built-in ones do.
So even if you accept these transcripts that are offered, which it sounds like you're not too enthusiastic about, there's no real standard for noting like individual timestamps for them, right? Like, you had said that you theoretically have the resolution by which you could do the like Instagram thing of highlighting individual words as they're being spoken. And that presumably there's no affordance for that right now, right?
The transcript tag, the podcast transcript tag, it supports these, WebVTT and SRT files.
Oh, okay. So there would then support.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
They don't support per word. They do just timestamp line because they're geared towards subtitles that will be shown like on a TV screen. So it's like at this timestamp, show this text on the screen, and then 3 seconds pass, and then now show this text, and it's whole sentences, right?
Well, it is usually, but I don't think it needs to be necessarily. Like, there's nothing stopping the authors of those files from having like one line per word and having, having each. I mean, it would look ridiculous in the file context, but I think ultimately, though, you are right, Casey, that like in practice, the way these files are usually authored, the way they are usually used, because they come from the world of subtitles from video content, they're made to be displayed in sentences at a time.
Sure.
Like the way closed captions would be displayed on videos. So it is very unlikely, I think, that almost any producer who makes SRT or VTT files would give word level timing.
I got you. And then I was going to ask, would you create a spec, kind of in the spirit of X callback URL, but it sounds like you don't really need to. You could just abuse the VTT and whatever the other, was it SLT or something?
SRT, like yeah. They're very similar formats.
You could just abuse that if you really wanted to go down this road.
Yeah. And the reality is like, I can try to do a lot of features around these file formats, but again, because the world of DAI does not really support them, there's just not that much demand and there's not that much supply. I will support them in the sense that I will download them and parse them and have a way to display them and maybe even display them by default. I think that would probably be the right move. But I don't think I'm going to have them replace mine. And honestly, I would be very surprised if most of my users ever saw a podcast that actually had them.
Yeah, I get that. That makes sense. All right, cool. Thank you. A couple of people wrote in, including Drew Stevenson, with regard to how you're managing all this. And Drew wrote, for background cues, did Marco consider something like Factory, Faktory? My job uses it for processing media in the background on some Mac Minis, and it's rock solid and covers all the edges around running job cues.
Overcast infrastructure uses tools that were proven and boring in 2013. So what does that mean? It means things like MySQL. It means PHP. It means Memcached, Redis, and BeanstalkD. That's my server stack. It's those things. Nginx with the PHP FPM plugin. Like that's what I'm using here. So what this queue is BeanstalkD, which is very old, very boring, and it works fantastically. It has almost no features. Almost no one that I've ever met uses it, but it's fine, and I've been running it forever. I do use Redis's queues for feed crawling because they allow me to the way Overcast is feed crawling, basically, I have these crawl servers that run the Go process that I wrote a million years ago and then instantly forgot Go. I learned Go just to write that one process, haven't touched it since, and have since completely forgotten Go. But I think today, if I ever needed to add anything to it, I would just have AI help me because I need to relearn this entire language. Yeah. But anyway, the way those work is they crawl the feeds, they stuff the content of a changed feed into Redis, and then they add to a big Redis queue so that other processing PHP processes that parse those can go pick them up and crawl them. Redis, though, is even heavier duty for this case than Beanstalk, which is Beanstalk D is like, what if Memcache D, but for queues? Beanstalk is where I put lighter queue work in Overcast that is not feed crawls. And that's things like checking for redirects. It's things like checking for artwork updates on feeds, things like that, sending notifications, processing my ping API, stuff like that. And so I built transcripts on top of the Beanstalk section of Overcast. Each of the queue consumers that's running on the Mac Minis just hits an API endpoint on Overcast web service and says, "Hey, give me some jobs, give me some jobs, give me some jobs." Fairly straightforward setup, I think, for queue processing. Now, again, there's lots of other queue services, queue stacks, things like that. I haven't used the services because they're just too expensive. What Overcast processes overall, in its job queues, especially if I include feed crawling, we're talking over 1 million jobs a day, easily. Any kind of managed queue service, when you actually price out what it would cost, it's a lot. At this scale. So I don't use those. I just run it myself, and it costs nothing because running Beanstalk D is incredibly lightweight. It costs nothing. That's the same reason I send Apple push notifications myself. I wrote a simple PHP class to do it. It's not that hard. And I manage it through Beanstalk D, and I send them, and it's fine because I send probably millions of push notifications a day, and it costs me nothing because the processing time, the server resources to send those is as close to zero as you can imagine. It's just nothing. Whereas if you, again, go to some service to do it for you and you start paying, it's, just X cents per 1,000 notifications, whatever their pricing ends up being, for most apps, that's fine. When you're doing millions of things a day, that could be tens to hundreds of dollars a day. And when you spread that over the, 12 years I've been running Overcast, that's real money. So if I can write it myself in less than a day and have it work entirely with my own stuff, then it costs nothing to run over time. I don't have to worry about what happens if this service gets merged with some other company or shuts down or sunsets or changes their pricing model and now it's into enterprise and costs 10 times more for my use case. All those things that happen constantly in our business, I don't have to worry about them. So that's why I do a lot of this stuff the boring old way with a few simple processes running on some Linux servers that don't need that much from me. It is not cool. It is not sexy. It is not trendy. It is not what young people do. And none of those things matter to me because it works really well for me.
Now, with that said, you did do a Marco thing. Well, you did more Marco things, I should say, because
it's what I do best.
I looked up for the show notes, the Beanstalk D website, and it is exactly the kind of website you would expect for a thing that's been around since the beginning of time. So, this tracks. But you did another Marco thing, which is you wrote yourself a little app to manage stuff.
I did?
Yes, or at least it sure looks like you did. You posted on Mastodon a screenshot of something that says Overcast. The Overcast Transcriber.
Oh, yeah. This is the actual thing that is running on the Mac Minis. This is the app that transcribes things, that pulls the jobs from the servers and actually, transcribes them.
Oh, interesting. I'm sorry. So this is the app that's actually doing the work. Oh, my mistake. No wonder we were confused. My apologies.
Yeah. One copy runs on every Mac Mini. I assign each one because the Apple Speech Transcription API only supports 3 languages being installed at once on the system for reasons I don't know. Maybe that made sense on the iPhone. For some reason, it's also enforced on the Mac. But anyway, so it supports 6 languages, but only supports 3 of them being installed at once. So I have a simple picker on top to choose which 3 languages. They all do English and then they all kind of split the other 5 languages because there's way more English than any other ones. So that's what that is, and I pick how many jobs I want and I run them. And if this app ever crashes or if the computer reboots, no problem. LaunchD just starts it back up again, and it's totally fine. And then this app checks in with my main servers. Each one of these checks in once a minute or something like that, and it reports its stats of how many jobs it has done in the last minute or whatever. So that way, how many minutes of podcast has it transcribed? That way the servers can then kind of watch out for anomalies. So if, for instance, one of the Mac Minis doesn't respond at all, it will alert me and I can go reboot it or something. That doesn't happen very often. But also, if one of the Mac Minis is reporting a suspiciously high or suspiciously low job count per minute or transcription minute rate per minute, I can then go take a look and see something might be wrong there. And then the app itself, the Overcast Transcriber app that you see here, that app also tries to monitor itself. So if, for instance, it can't get jobs for a long time, for more than a few minutes, or if a job never completes and it never refills its jobs after a certain amount of time, it will quit itself and let LaunchD restart it. If something weird has gotten wedged somewhere, this kind of thing doesn't happen at very high rates. But when you're running 48 instances of them 24/7 for months, they do occasionally need weird things like that. Sometimes happen. So anyway, that's what that app is.
That's very cool. And I'm glad you provided a screenshot, which we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Aaron Dibner wrote, given that Marco now has a 48 Mac Mini cluster, while they each only have 16 gigs of RAM, it is possible to spread LLMs over multiple Macs these days. We've all probably seen the videos of 4 Mac studios clustered over Thunderbolt, but you can also do it over Ethernet just a bit slower. And so I presume, John, you put in a link in the show notes to a Beowulf cluster. Can you explain that, please?
Oh, that's just the old Slashdot thing. Marco remembers this, right?
I heard about them. I don't think I ever actually have seen one.
The meme was, and I'm surprised there was not a Know Your Meme page for this. I guess it's so old. It's such an old meme that it's not worth documenting as a meme on the internet. But Beowulf was we'll put a link to the Wikipedia page. It was a system where you could just take a bunch of commodity servers and then distribute a job across them. And you'd run Linux on these random PCs and you'd be like, but now I have 5 PCs and if I have a job and I can break it up into 5 pieces, these 5 PCs can work on it. And so all the Slashdot nerds back in the 90s were like, oh, Linux is awesome and Beowulf was awesome. And anytime there was any kind of hardware story on Slashdot, I don't know when it started, but people started posting, imagine a Beowulf cluster of these. And that just became a meme where people would say it about things that are not computers or whatever. It started half serious and became a meme. And so Aaron Dibner basically just wrote, imagine a Beowulf cluster of these about your Mac Minis. You could take one job and distribute it to all 48 and they'd all work on it at the same time. And what he's referring to, we'll put a link to this in the show notes, is this thing where Apple gave a bunch of YouTubers a stack of Mac Studios. You've probably seen them in the thumbnails. I think it was 4 Mac Studios with a little miniature, cute little Mac Studio rack kind of. And it's to promote their RDMA over Thunderbolt technology that was added in macOS 26.2. We'll link to Apple's developer site about that tech. What they say about it is RDMA over Thunderbolt enables low latency communication between Thunderbolt 5 hosts for use cases including distributed AI inference using MLX. And so what the YouTubers did with this stack was they got the biggest model that they could get that wouldn't run on a single Mac Studio because it didn't have enough RAM, and they would run it on the 4 Mac Studios, combining their RAM and, do performance numbers or whatever. We'll put links in the show notes to 2 videos, one from Alex Ziskind. The title of his video is I ran a trillion parameter AI on a Mac. And then Jeff Geerling also has one that says Apple didn't have to go this hard. But there were others. Many YouTubers got this. So if you want to see an example of a technology that Aaron is talking about, imagine a Beowulf cluster of these. And it's the same type of deal. It's can you distribute something across multiple computers that wouldn't fit on one? And can you do that quickly? And obviously doing it over Thunderbolt 5 with machines that are right next to each other is really fast. Doing it over Ethernet is probably a little bit slower, but that's what he's pitching here.
Yeah, and so the main downside of this for my use case is that, yes, as John said, speed of the communication is everything. And Ethernet between these Mac Minis is just 1 gigabit, because these are the base models. So they don't have 10 gigabit ports. I also don't have a giant 10 gigabit switch there, but that could be remedied. But they only have 1 gigabit ports, and These Mac Minis only have Thunderbolt 4 because Thunderbolt 5 on the Mac Mini currently requires the M4 Pro chip, which like triples the price of the Mac Mini and does not triple the performance for my use case. So I didn't get them. So because I have the base models, I could only do it over Ethernet. And that would be probably slow enough that would probably not be worth doing.
And the pitch for this is that you would somehow use some bigger model than what you're using, because the model you're using now runs on your Mac Minis. It fits in 16 gigs of RAM. It's, runs on the phone. Like the pitch is, well, what if you wanted to run some more sophisticated model that wouldn't fit in the RAM of a single one? You could lop off a portion of your 48 and say, this cluster of 4 is the big beefy transcriber for the top 10 most popular podcasts, and we run a bigger model there.
Yeah, exactly. But right now, this is something that like I'm going to look at these kind of uses in the future, especially because like once I'm done transcribing the back catalog for as many podcasts as I can, these are going to be at like a third to half capacity. So I'm going to have a lot of extra computing power. And I mentioned before, I would definitely want to move some of my heavier tasks from the main servers that are the main Linux servers. I'd love to move a lot of those tasks to these, to whatever degree that's reasonably possible. But that's not going to work for everything. So I'm still going to need a bunch of servers. So I will have to maybe get creative on like, what do I do with this computing power that I have here? And, ideally like things that can stay within one machine are better because it's easier to scale that. It's easier to share code between the iPhone and the servers. So ideally I would just keep doing more things with Apple's foundation models. And we'll see, this summer at WWDC, there might be updates to the foundation models, and maybe they get things like larger context windows, which should make them more useful in a lot of ideas I have on how to use them. So we'll see how these go in the future. Right now, they are being criminally underused in the sense that they, let's see, my memory use, I just pulled one of them up here. One of them that's under full transcription load right now is using about 7 gigs of its memory, of its 16 gigs. So I have about half the memory that I could play with. Also, they are really not using their GPUs much at all. That will change once I move image resizing to them, but it won't change that much. So I think I'm going to have a lot of CPU or a lot of GPU capacity that I could use and a decent amount of RAM. So we'll see how I can play with that over time. But right now, I'm still going through back catalogs, and maybe we'll see what the summer brings.
John, I would be remiss not to mention System X. Do you remember this?
Give me more context.
This is a zillion, I believe it was X serves all networked together to be a very impressive.
The Virginia Tech thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I didn't know that. I'd forgotten that was the name of it.
Is that considered a Beowulf cluster in your mind?
Yeah, no, it was exactly the same thing. Imagine a Beowulf cluster of these. I mean, obviously it's not like Beowulf is a specific piece of software, but it just became a meme of whenever you take a bunch of stuff and connect it together and make it do something that no individual part of it could do.
Coming all the way back around to Aaron Dibner, who started this whole conversation, Aaron writes, this Apple Insider article is a bit outdated, but the idea is there. It's totally doable for a setup of your kind. And this was, I believe, pre the thing where you can chain them over Thunderbolt. I think this was done via Ethernet, if I'm not mistaken, but you can look, we'll put a link in the show notes. You can look at it for yourself.
We are sponsored this episode by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform designed to help you stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or scaling a business, Squarespace gives you everything you need to claim your domain, showcase your offerings with a professional website, grow your brand, and get paid, all in one place. What I love about Squarespace is that they can host any kind of website you need to host, and they do it so easily with so little effort and no nerdery or nerd skills required. So if somebody comes to you in your life and says, hey, you're a computer nerd, can you help me make a website? You can say, actually, why don't you go to squarespace.com/ATP? I know that's how you talk, right? Go to squarespace.com/ATP and you'll get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain by using that special URL. But you can build the site there yourself. And that's way more powerful than somebody coming to you as a nerd and having you do it for them or have to go through you all the time to keep it updated. When they can do it themselves, that empowers them. And what's great about Squarespace too is that whether they're trying to build a portfolio site, a simple site, or a whole business site, you can host entire storefronts, entire businesses on Squarespace. Whether you're selling physical goods, digital goods, things like time slots, if you're, say, a consultant or a coach, you can sell things like electronic content, like PDFs, and ebooks and things like that, private membership areas, newsletters that are paid or not paid. Like, they support all of this stuff on Squarespace, and it's so easy for anybody to go there. And I strongly suggest, when you or someone else needs to build a new website, go use their free trial, because you can build the entire site in trial mode. You don't have to give them a payment method or anything. Go see for yourself how easy Squarespace is. The features they have are incredible. So much stuff, way more than what fits in one ad read. Anything a modern business might want. Analytics, SEO, campaigns. There's so much in Squarespace. Check it out for yourself. Squarespace.com/ATP. Start your free trial and use offer code ATP at purchase to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring our show.
The entire internet wrote in to tell Marco about Mac fleet management advice.
I did ask for it.
Yeah, no, well, first of all, you asked for it. Second of all, it was helpful. And I don't think I saw any of them being like, how did you not know? Everyone was very helpful and very kind. So even on Marco's behalf, I was fascinated reading it. I'm sure Marco was too, and we appreciate it. But apparently there are many, many different ways of approaching this. I'd like to leave aside the announcement from yesterday, whenever it was, for just a moment. But based on what you have read, or maybe you haven't had the time to read anything, what would you say is your summarization of what you've learned?
So what companies do that have to manage large fleets of Macs, of course, is not setting them all up one by one like I did here. Like, no one does this. No one should do this. What companies do is they have this thing through what I believe until yesterday was called Apple Business Manager. Or something like that. There's a lot of words that all sound very similar. But Apple has like a business API. You can configure machines to be set up for your business and locked to your business with MDM, which is the framework they use to manage corporate iPhones and iOS devices and Macs. You can buy these things through your Apple Business Rep, through Apple's business channels, or through certain authorized resellers, and have the machine's serial numbers automatically enroll to your company when they connect to the internet for the first time. So they call it zero touch deployment, I think, so that you can ship a laptop to a remote employee, and when they plug it in and set it up, it gets activated to the company's management system through Apple.
That is very cool.
And gets all the stuff it needs to get right from there, which is very cool. And once you are in these systems, you have full management over them. So you can do things like push software updates and stuff like that, and you can run programs, you can change settings, whatever it is. You can have all that centrally managed. So that is basically what I want. And the only downside is when you already have the machines pre-existing, like I do here. Everyone said in order to enroll them into this kind of management, you need to wipe them and you need physical access. So it would be a process of, I would go to the data center one day, bring a big cup of coffee, keep it below the Mac Minis, John, and just go through one by one. All right, reset this one, reset this. Just take them down one by one, reset them, wipe them, put them in the thing. But before this announcement of Apple Business, which happened yesterday, the day before, before this announcement, there was the second part of it, which was, okay, Apple Business Manager would have the component of registering the serial numbers, associating them to a business that had an MDM thing. But then what everyone else did was have their own MDM providers through companies like Jamf, former sponsor of the show a long time ago. This is what most big businesses do, is they have one of these MDM apps that the problem with those from my use case, and they provide a huge amount of functionality, because usually it's not only providing the basics of MDM configuration and stuff like that, but they also usually have additional services they layer on top of it, like security packages, stuff like that. The problem is that all of those MDMs, or at least most of them, you're paying something like $6 to $12 per Mac per month. And, again, you have 48 Mac Minis that literally don't have users. That's not a great selling proposition for me. All of the features of these MDMs that do user security management, making sure your users have good passwords and making sure they don't browse weird things on the internet, that's all stuff that businesses do need for their computers, but I don't need for these computers. These computers have no user. They run one app. You've seen it now. It's a very simple arrangement. And what I'm doing right now to keep them up to date, their software I don't really keep up to date yet because that hasn't really had a need yet. I guess I'll get there, and that's why I'm looking at something like an MDM, mainly for OS updates. But there's one other software package that I use on them that's pretty important. Casey, you're gonna love this. It's Tailscale. Also former sponsor, maybe current sponsor, I don't know. So the way I access these machines, because they're all behind the router at the data center, so they all run Tailscale. And that allows me to say, SSH, into Scribe 23, and it just gets me there. So what I do now, when I have to update my transcriber app, is I do, an archive build on Xcode, and I export the binary after it's signed, and I just use SSH to SCP it over to each of these Macs, and part of the SSH script is have LaunchD stop the app, SSH the new one into place, have LaunchD start the app again. And it just goes through the 48 servers and just does that to each one in succession, and I can push an app update to all of them in about 30 seconds. So I've kind of already built a lot of what an MDM would give me, and in a more nerdy way. But what would be even better is if I didn't have to run Tailscale on all of these. So if the MDM situation can do things like, remote desktop or, remote viewing, remote control, if it can do those things and give me network access to them directly without me having to run something like Tailscale on them, that's great. I don't know that it can do that yet. Maybe some of them can. I haven't had time to look that much, but for the most part, most of the features that the MDMs offer are mostly things I don't really need. So it's not really worth me paying a lot for one of these services. But there are some really cheap ones. And getting to the announcement now, coincidentally, Apple announced yesterday that they've merged all of their various business backend services into the new thing just called Apple Business.
Yeah, so Apple Business is apparently a thing where they're, I guess, doing their own MDM or providing their own sort of solution. I'm a bit fuzzy on it, but let me read a couple of things that John was kind enough to pull out of the newsroom announcement. Apple today, on March 24th, announced Apple Business, a new all-in-one platform that includes key services companies need to effortlessly manage devices, reach more customers, equip team members with essential apps and tools, and get support. Apple Business will be available on April 14th as a free service in the US and 200 other countries. Apple Business Essentials, Apple Business Manager, and Apple Business Connect. Those will no longer be available once Apple Business launches. It's kind of slurping all those up and making one unified interface. It sure seems to me like if I were you, I would at least kick the tires on this first and see what it's got. And then if you need to go the route of Jamf or something else, then so be it.
Yeah, that's my current plan is now that Apple is about to launch, I think they said April 14th. Yeah. Now that they're about to launch their own first party, better, more featured version of this, I would rather just use that. And so I will look at that when it comes out. In the meantime, my pile of hacks is fine, but I will look at this, especially as I approach this summer's beta season. If I do end up wanting to run betas on some or all of these, that's going to be a burden. So, having centralized software management will be a lot nicer. So we'll see when the time comes.
My one suggestion, and a lot of other people wrote in with a suggestion as well, is it does seem like you need something probably from Apple that can handle OS updates and stuff like that. Although the various reports we got about the quality of Apple's previous Apple Business Manager software and their MDM stuff is not all glowing, but and this is a new product, Apple Business, supposedly. So there might be some growing pains there. But the other part of it, the part where you're SCPing a file onto a bunch of Macs, everyone. This is where the second piece of advice we got is Unix nerds are saying there's a million, free open source command line packages for configuring a whole bunch of Unixy servers. And yes, they're not, it's a Mac, but it's also a Unixy server. And if all you have to do if all you're doing is essentially something that you can do with SCP now, rather than doing SCP in a loop and dealing with that and everything, there's a million software packages, most of which probably run on the Mac that you can try. A lot of people suggested Ansible. There's also CF Engine. Back in the day, there was Puppet. I don't know if it still exists. A lot of those things do have a way to run on the Mac. They're, They're Unixy command line things, then you have to figure out how to get that installed on the Macs. But if you're the only job of that part of the system is, oh, and by the way, there's something that I want to do that I can do from like a shell script or whatever, just you can do that outside of Apple's things. And the reason I worry about it, having not used these products, is like you have a new version of the transcription app that we just talked about before. You want to get that to all the machines. I'm sure Apple Business Manager has a way to get the new version of your transcription app to all the machines. I'm also guessing that it takes its time because in a business environment, everyone needs the new version of Outlook. It rolls out when it rolls out. There's no like, I want it to go to all 48 machines now.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's taking 30 seconds. Yeah.
Even if they offer that as an option, it's just like, that's not what those things are made for. Like you probably never even want that in a situation where you're deploying to 2,000 Macs. You don't want them to all instantly get the new version of Outlook. You want it to roll it out. So maybe, depending on if Apple Business Manager or whatever, if Apple Business has some gaps, rather than saying, oh, now I need one of those commercial MDMs that charges me an amount per Mac per month, at least look at like Ansible and some of the other Unixy stuff that basically are a fancy distributed way for you to run Unix commands on a fleet of servers without you having to like deal with the plumbing.
I mean, so my argument to that would be, though, like, I already built that with SSH and a shell script. Like it's,
I know, but like it's just how good is your error checking and how parallelized is it? How fast can it do all 48 machines? Yada yada. Like there's a reason these things exist. Things like Puppet sprang into existence because people used to write scripts that would loop over things and distribute tarballs and untar them and do then they made products out of that because doing it manually kind of sucks.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like this is the kind of thing like what your needs are determines a lot about what the solution here should be. My needs are so simple here that if all it's going to save me doing is like, right now, like I have just a simple, text file that's about 30 lines long. That is my instructions for setting up a new Mac Mini. And there's not much, it's not that hard. It's like I changed like 5 settings and, mostly about power management, like stay on, really stay on, no, really always stay on. and give it my SSH public key and say, all right, accept anything from this, go. and turn on remote desktop. That's about it. Like that's roughly all I do. If something is like, well, you can have more control over it by installing this different product. Okay, but right now I install no different products and I have all the control I need. So to me, I would say like that additional complexity, even if the product is free, setting aside any kind of cost, the additional complexity of having another thing being involved, that's another moving part. That's another company that can go out of business or another thing I have to keep updated or that might break in 3 years with the new, OS update that Apple gives or whatever. Every one of those moving pieces, I evaluate like, is this giving me enough benefit over my current situation to be worth its additional risks and complexity? And because my needs for these are so simple, the answer to that for a lot of these things is no. Now, not for everything. And again, like software updates are the big thing that I definitely would like to be automated better. But adding any other layers, any other packages, any other products, they all have to pass that test before they're going to be worth it for me. And they're going to be worth it for a lot of businesses before they're going to be worth it for me.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting you get rid of your little 30-line thing that you run. I was suggesting you just get something else to be the plumbing to run your 30-line thing. That's it. Because, again, if you just, it'll do it more in parallel. It can monitor if it's been successfully done on all the machines. If you update the machines, it will immediately redo it because it'll see that it hasn't been done. That type of thing. That's what you're getting. It's just the plumbing. It's basically a fancy remotely run a bunch of commands on a bunch of machines for me and make sure that if those settings ever get changed or if anything changes in the machines, that you set them back to the way they were. And it's also a fancy plumbing way to say, oh, and if there's some files you want to be on those machines, like your app, just tell me where it is and I'll make sure it's so the latest version is always on all the machines. And that's what you'd be getting. I haven't actually used Ansible myself. I have used Puppet and I hated it. So there is, like there's something to be said for doing it all yourself. But if it turns out to be tedious and you're spending a lot of time dealing with that, those Unix, what I'm saying is I would look at those Unix things before I would look at one of the fancier MDMs.
All right. Anything else with regard to Overcast?
No, I think I'm working through all the, bugs and reports and the other thing is I said that that I had spent a huge amount of time last summer getting an algorithm to fingerprint the audio so that I can align it around dynamic ad insertion. I did not realize that ShazamKit was an API and it offers exactly that functionality.
Oh no.
So I haven't actually, I'm going to try it. I'm going to see, is their signature better than mine? Is their fingerprinting, is it better? I don't actually know. So I'm going to experiment. I'm not going to do that this week or anything, but sometime soon I'm going to experiment with that to see, should I basically start using their alignment instead or in addition to mine? But that was kind of a little bit oh no, did I spend months doing something from scratch that Apple has an API to do? We'll see.
Yeah, I got it. I know Guy Rambo had reached out to us to tell us about ShazamKit. Perhaps you heard it from others.
Yes,
as well,
that's right. It was from Guy. That is indeed where I heard about it. And yeah, I'm oh no. But we'll see. So part of my fingerprinting algorithm is it has to be very very low granularity of time. If the block size it's working on is a 10 or 15 second chunk, that might not be good enough for what I'm doing here. What my fingerprinting, the sample resolution for it is something like a quarter of a second. And it also has to be a small enough data set that whatever the fingerprint that you generate for an entire podcast, it has to be a reasonable size. It can't be many megabytes of data if you're going to do that resolution across a 3-hour show, So I'll see, I don't know what exactly their data is stored and what resolution it is. So that's all going to be part of the experimentation phase and see should I switch to theirs or not will depend on things like that.
And in a final piece of follow-up for today, AirPods Max and their popularity in New York, you had commented that everyone and their mom has a AirPods Max in the New York metro area these days. How is that possible, especially when some of these people are kids, 15, 16-year-old kids or whatever? Apparently all of them, or maybe most of them anyway, are fakes, which I did not know.
Yeah, so many people have written in to say either they suspect they're fakes or they live in Manhattan and they see that they're fakes. And I can verify when I'm in Manhattan about once a week. I do see the guys on the streets that sell all the fake luxury goods on those little tables. Yeah, there's always AirPods Max lookalikes on those tables too. And every all the store windows that are the random little electronic stores where you look and you're I bet most of the stuff in there is probably knockoffs. They also all have AirPods Max lookalike headphones. So I'm sure many AirPods Max looking fakes are sold. But I'll tell you, I'll be damned if I can spot one. People say oh, you can tell they look cheaper, their finish is wrong, they have a plastic crown, different things people have told us to try to spot them. But at the distances that I'm not going to hover over someone's shoulder and start eyeing the details of their digital crown to see hey, is that plastic or metal? Can I tap that for a second? I'm not going to at regular distances, I can't tell. So I assume, I'm sure lots of them are fakes, but I also think a lot of people are probably buying them because they are visually iconic and Apple is still selling them. And, if Apple wasn't selling these, in any meaningful quantity, they wouldn't have even given them the 2 half-butted updates they did give them. They would have had no update forever. So someone's buying them. But yeah, I bet a bunch of them are fake.
We are sponsored this week by Babble On. So if you've ever shipped an app internationally, you know that localization pretty much goes one or two ways. You can ship your localizations via strings or, God help you, a spreadsheet to some faceless company that has 80 million salespeople and 3 translators. And then forever later, you get translations that sound, I don't know, something like an office printer's mad at you. But hey, at least they're in Japanese. Or option 2, and you're probably going to want to go with option 2. You work with Babble On. They're a small, dedicated localization team. You can talk to them in Slack, deliver strings during a sprint, and get answers quickly when something in your UI breaks. So I've been working with Babble On, and that's Babble On. Get it? Very well done. I've been working with them to do localization for Call Sheet for Korean and Japanese, and it's been really, really great. I said to them, hey, I've already got all my localization files in this public GitHub repo. Do you want me to send them to you myself, or can you just slurp those up? And they said, no problem, we'll slurp them up. And they even offered to jump in Slack with me. And I said, okay, that sounds great. And I figured, to be honest with you, that I was getting the white glove treatment because of the whole, ad read that we're in the middle of and all that. But no, they assured me this is their normal operating procedure. And not only that, when they started looking at these translations in the context of the test flight, after I added them, of course, there were a handful of times that they said, oh, you know what? Now that we see this in context, I don't think we gave you the best possible option. Let's go back and redo this one or that one. It's been really, really great to work with them. And my Japanese and Korean localizations should be excellent now. So Babble On has 150 professional translators that only do localization. You pay per word. Everything else is included free, including their hosting and backend. You can sync your schliffs, I don't know what you call these things, with GitHub or any other repo. They'll QA some stuff. They'll work with you in Slack. They've been doing this for 22 years. So if your app is ready to go global, or if you're tired of fixing translations after the fact, Babble On will help you ship localizations that won't make your international users feel gross. Visit ibabbleon.com/ATP for 10% off your translations forever. That's ibabbleon.com/ATP for 10% off your translations forever. Thank you to Babble On for sponsoring the show. WWDC 2026 has been announced. It is June 8th through 12th, so happy birthday, Marco. Anyways, suffice to say, June 8th through 12th, apparently in episode 673 back in January, which for my purposes is like 700 years ago, we talked about what we were looking forward to in 26. I have zero recollection of what I said, but I don't know. I'm sure there are things... there are definitely things I'm looking forward to, but nothing is like leaping out at me right this moment. So, John, other than the Mac Pro...
I'm not looking forward to that. There's nothing to look forward to.
No, I think best case scenario, the Mac Pro gets killed at WWDC.
Yeah, I don't understand why they haven't killed it yet. I don't know what they're waiting for. But anyway...
well, they're waiting for the Mac Studio. It's by far the most likely scenario that the Mac Studio will be updated at some point in the future, and at that time, they will discontinue the Mac Pro. I think that is the most likely way this goes.
Yeah, I don't understand why they're waiting, though. It's not as if the Mac Pro is filling some need waiting for the Mac Studio to replace it. You know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway... Yeah, what I remember from the January episode is we were talking about tech things for the entire year. Narrowing it to WWDC, I think the subset of things that I talked about on that episode are still basically the same. I'm still looking forward to M5 Ultra or whatever new chip that they haven't yet announced. And presumably that will be in a Mac Studio. And I'm looking forward to it both because I'm interested and also because I'm probably going to buy one. So I'm kind of, was looking forward to it, now kind of a little bit scared about how much it's going to cost to get that 8 terabyte SSD and the amount of RAM I'm going to want. We'll see how that goes. And then the other thing that I also talked about, I think, in the January episode was, let's see how Apple does with their AI stuff. They were supposed to roll out a bunch of new Siri stuff in supposedly 26.4, which was just released, but notice it didn't arrive in 26.4. In fact, we had an item in the show notes that just kept getting pushed off wherever. That was basically hey, remember Apple's dates that it set for itself, that they were going to do some Siri stuff in 26 point something and then more in 27? Well, it looks like they're missing the 26 something date. And so maybe we're just waiting for a WWDC for Siri not to suck as bad. So that's it. If Siri can get any better, and M5 Ultra Mac Studio. Hell, even M5 Max Mac Studio. Even if there's no Ultra at all, just the M5 Max Mac Studio, and to see how that's priced, and for me to figure out what I'm going to get. That's what I'm looking forward to / dreading.
I feel like the obvious answer here is, okay, what is the AI story? That's the elephant in the room, right? And I don't know. On the one side, I'm not sure what it is that I want them to tell me with regard to the AI story. But then again, Apple is so very good at telling me, oh, you never know you needed blank, but you did. And then I say, yes, you're right. I absolutely did.
What you want them to tell you is Siri doesn't suck anymore. That's what we're all waiting for, is just because I almost feel like everything else, the world is passing them by in all the other areas. It doesn't need Apple's help to do any AI stuff. People are doing it anyway. But Siri is the one thing that the world can't make better. Only Apple can. Only Apple, in the way that they never mean it. Only Apple can do that, which is we're all stuck with Siri until Apple fixes it.
It's so true. And with regard to development tools and things like that, I think there's a couple of things that I'd really look forward to, but I'm skeptical that any or all of these will happen. Number one, I would love them to start really leaning into documentation even more. They've been doing better they've been doing better. They really have.
You make fun of me with Mac Pro, Hope. Jeez.
That's true. You're right. Actually, you are not wrong about that, John. I really want to argue with you, but you are 100% correct.
That's like hoping for lower App Store fees.
Right?
Good luck.
No, you're both right. You're both right. I cannot argue, but a man can dream. So I mean, I'd love them to, I mean, I don't think they would ever come out and say, hey, we're actually going to write documentation now, but it would be cool if they, just did a better job of it. And again, in their defense, they've been getting better and better over the years, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah. Getting better isn't better.
Right, exactly.
Getting better is a direction, but it does not express the position.
Yeah, speaking of documentation, like just one of the things that's been bothering me lately, because I've been really like sort of digging down to some really minor stuff in my apps because I'm not adding major features. I'm just looking for like really obscure bugs and stuff. God, can you imagine if Apple wrote in its documentation what threads things happen on in the functions that they provide and the APIs they provide?
Oh my God.
Because it's really important for me to know, hey, what thread is that callback going to be called on? Hey, when this block gets called, what thread is it? What thread? And you can guess and you can check, but if you check at runtime, it's like, it seems like this is always called on the main thread. Is that always going to be called on the main thread? Am I just getting lucky? That would be an example of where you would add documentation or give us a source code. One or the other, please, Apple.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing I'd like is, please, Apple, please, for the love of all that is good and holy in the world, can you make tab management in Xcode make any sense whatsoever?
That's not possible.
Any sense. Any amount of sense.
It has never made sense to me.
For the love of God, anything would work other than what you've got right now and the 7 tries you made before it, because, oh my God, tabs in Xcode, they're the bane of my existence. Maybe I'm a moron. I don't know. I don't think a lot of people are very enthusiastic about this, but it drives me nuts literally every time I do my job. It's incredible.
Ignore the tabs and pretend they don't exist. I have tab blindness in Xcode. I just ignore them. I don't even see that strip of the UI. I don't interact with it. It is dead to me.
If only.
Yeah, because I've never once learned how to navigate via tabs, so I just don't. I navigate from the sidebar only.
Yeah, the only thing I do with tabs is I have my own custom keyboard shortcut, which I'm really regretting because they have no way to sync these. But anyway, I have my own custom keyboard shortcut that I have to constantly change as they mess with the tab system, which adds a second pane with the same file that I'm editing to my right, and then I use the X to close it. That's my only interaction with that bar.
Yeah, well, make it make sense, Apple, please. And then, obviously, just in general, new APIs are fun, especially if they're, mostly fully fleshed out. But that being said, I would also love for Apple to just tell us, you know what, we've gone through and we have improved all the existing APIs. With the things that aren't async await friendly already now are. I would love the proverbial snow leopard year for APIs as well. But again, I'm barking up a tree that they'll never commit to this. But we'll see.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think, Marco?
For me, I really just want to see the AI tools keep going.
Yes, that's a good call.
Like what they added last year, like the first year of quote Apple Intelligence was for developers nothing. Like we had nothing that we could possibly do for iOS 18. Last year with iOS 26, they gave us a lot of APIs that I think overall look pretty good. Most developers I know have not had a ton of time to build with them, and I certainly haven't for the most part, because of Liquid Glass really took up a lot of our resources and a lot of our time. And, the one big one, obviously, that I did use was the speech transcriber API, which is great. A couple of weird little things here. Like if you've seen a podcast that uses the word billion in a sentence, how the speech transcriber transcribes the word billion is 1000000, like whatever the number. It's like a 1 followed by like 9. That's how it. And so you see this with no commas, no thousand separators. So you see this one giant, this 1 followed by 9 zeros in the middle of a sentence. It's hilarious.
I just got a notification today that said you're getting a call from 1,254,000. Like it read out a phone number as just a long integer.
Yeah, that's one of my longstanding gripes. Is like, oftentimes I'm wearing AirPods when a message comes in, and it will announce the message, and it never knows what numbers are. Even like it'll be reading an address to me, and it'll read like the zip code as like 1,005, like 10. But the best is when it reads out tracking numbers from shipment notifications to you.
Oh yeah, those are long.
It'll read through the whole thing. And oh my god. Anyway, those whatever part of machine learning or Siri is being used to announce messages to you in AirPods is really primitive, and I would love for that to get better. That's separate. This is a diversion from my other main topic, because that whatever that API is that's generating that speech is really dumb and also unreliable. Like, I will still like I'll have a message, boop, so and so has sent you a message, but I can't read it, and I go and look, and it's like a regular sentence. I'm like, why you couldn't read that? What something broke? Or it'll say so and so sent you a message. And it'll start reading it, and then it'll just stop, like halfway through a sentence, and just fail. I'm like, okay, thanks, I guess. Anyway, that area needs attention. It's needed attention for a long time. Anyway, but what I'm looking forward to for WWDC, continued progress on the AI-related APIs for developers. Last year was a great start. We still are nowhere near the vision of Apple Intelligence originally, with like the app intent powered system to do all that stuff. We are constantly rumored to get it. It's like next year is going to be the year of Linux on the desktop. Next year is going to be finally the OS release that we get the app intent based Siri intelligence system. We'll see if that comes out. There's a lot still to do in terms of integrating AI with the system, giving developers ways to integrate AI into our own apps, and making the AI that's tying all this together better. We are in the infancy of that process on Apple's platforms. So as that gets better, we are going to be able to make much better apps, and our customers will be able to have much better experiences, and our apps will be able to do better things with the system and with other apps through AI integrations and everything. But right now, we are almost nowhere along that path. So that's what I really want to see, is like, give me the next step on that path. What else can we now do with AI on Apple's platforms without like bundling in our entire, bundling in a 3 gig model with our apps? Like, what if we just use Apple's platform? Things like, what can we do now that we couldn't do before? What limits are raised? What new capabilities are added? And then finally, I just really want to see some revision to Liquid Glass. Now, I know, we talked about it in overtime last week. I know that we're not going to have a huge undoing. They're not going to throw it all in the trash and give us something that looks like iOS 18 again. That's fine. That's not what I'm asking for. And I don't think that's not what most people are asking for. What I want is revision, improvement, iteration on the concept of Liquid Glass. The number one thing I want to see is there should never be a common pattern in Apple's stock UI that puts blurry text under other text I'm trying to read. Now, that's not all of Liquid Glass. The biggest offender here is bars. Text, like toolbars and navigation bars. Navigation bars in iOS parlance are the bars on top of a screen with the title bar and a couple of buttons and text that scrolls under it. Toolbars are the same thing at the bottom of the screen where you have buttons on the bottom. With Liquid Glass, there are no bars anymore. Your content just blurs and scrolls under everything. That's not helping anybody. And when most people have trouble with Liquid Glass, either conceptually or really like in terms of reading it, that's like the number one thing on the hit list is the lack of solid or mostly solid bars and having to blur text under other text, which makes it difficult to read. That is not an easy problem to solve. With the design language they have chosen, that's going to require a decent amount of design to go back to some kind of defined bar with a defined edge, and then the bar itself maybe is made of frosted glass or something, and pretty heavily frosted, hopefully, and that would alleviate almost the entire problem. Like if they just made bars a defined area with a border that ended and a background that is mostly solid, you fix this problem.
I would be shocked if they did that, but if you look in macOS 26.4, they did do something that you can see in the System Settings app. Lots of people used to post, screenshots of the System Settings app, which has a search field on top of the left sidebar. And as you scroll the left sidebar has text items like general, sound, whatever. That text would scroll underneath the search field. And as soon as you scrolled anywhere other than at the very, very top, where there was any text below the search field has placeholder text that says search. And then you could also read whatever the item was that was underneath it from the sidebar that had scrolled up there. And so it was like search with a word superimposed on it. And then you would type into that field, and it was terrible. In 26.4, the search field is a lot more frosty, and you can no longer read the text underneath it. You can still see some of the text through it. You can tell the text is there. You can see a black shadow scroll by as the text goes underneath it, because it's real important that you do that for some reason, but you can't read the text anymore. So that's my guess of what they'll do in 27 is not actually have a defined bar, which I agree would be way better. But my expectations are set at the 26.4 level, which is like, no, they're not going to bring back bars because they're too stubborn and it would be too hard. But what they will do is crank up the frost dial and make it so that you can't literally read text that's underneath controls.
I mean, that will help. It is not a solution. It is a Band-Aid.
No, I agree, but I think it's what they'll do.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, like I'm with you. Like I am not. This is not something I'm optimistic about. This is a wish, not an expectation.
You're looking forward to, but ready to be disappointed. Like Casey with the documentation.
That's it. Yeah, like, this is. Yeah, I'd say I have similar odds of success here. I trust that Apple has really good design talent, and I know that they could make defined bars look good and look modern. It isn't. We don't have to like.
It's been done many times before.
Yeah,
by Apple.
And you can keep like so much of the liquid glass design language is not necessarily at odds with that. You could keep so much of how controls look, toolbars, buttons, the animation, the way they blob up and blob back together, and like so many of those things are totally doable on a mostly solid bar with a border. Like, and even if the whole bar could be a capsule, who cares? Like, there's so many different ways you could do it. And you could make the bar frosted, you could make whatever you want it to do. There are ways to design this to make it look fresh and modern. It doesn't have to look old. And the old way wasn't the only way to do it. They can do it. There's lots of options. It just takes the will and maybe the humility to some degree to realize, like, okay, this direction of liquid glass has too many problems in real life. Let's rethink some of that. And you don't need to throw away the whole language to do it. So anyway, that's what I would hope to see, is those two big pillars: better AI APIs and liquid glass being more usable. And I think I'll get probably both of those things, but probably neither one done to the level I want it to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm interested to see how this goes. I think to some degree there's, settling. What is the term or phrase from Godfather, settling the family debts or whatever it is?
I'm settling all family toolbars.
They need to do that with Siri. I concur with you that I actually, especially on iOS, I mostly like liquid glass, but the thing that drives me nuts is the toolbar treatment. I mean, there's other things as well, but the thing that drives me nuts the most often is that I am looking directly through a toolbar and don't even know it. And so I completely agree with you there, Marco. But we'll see. I mean, time will tell. I'm excited to see what happens. I'm excited for us to do our Monday night show, as we always do. As far as I know, all of us will be remote, so I'm not trying to quietly announce anything. But anyways, it should be fun, and I'm curious to see what Apple does.
We are sponsored this episode by DeleteMe. DeleteMe makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data from hundreds of data broker sites at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. So, if you search for your own name or anyone else's name on a common search engine on the web, what you're going to get is a listing of a bunch of sites offering to tell you that person's address, phone number, maybe even like social security number, and even creepier, like their family names, their kids' names. Like it's kind of gross. And what these sites are data brokers, and they hoover up as much personal data as they can on as many people as possible. That way, if somebody searches for their name on a search engine, they might come by and give them $30 or whatever. What DeleteMe does is automate the opting out and takedowns of your info from hundreds of these sites. They all have different mechanisms to do it, but they're all different. And so one person would never be able to keep up with all the hundreds of data broker sites out there and all their different opt-out procedures, but DeleteMe specializes in this. So what you do is you sign up for DeleteMe, and they, on an ongoing basis, will go around and make sure that your info is opted out and taken down of as many data broker sites as they can find. As new sites crop up, they figure out their opt-outs and they add them to the procedure, so you don't have to keep up with it yourself. It's a great service. I personally went around looking for one of these services a few years ago, and I found they were highly recommended. In fact, the New York Times Wirecutter named DeleteMe their top pick for such services, and this is before they were a sponsor. I found them, I picked them, they're great. So, take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for DeleteMe, and now at a special discount for our listeners. Get 20% off your DeleteMe plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/ATP and use promo code ATP at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/ATP and enter code ATP at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/ATP, code ATP. Thanks to DeleteMe for sponsoring our show.
All right, let's do some Ask ATP. We haven't had the opportunity to do that in a little while, and we're starting with something that could have been written by Casey List, but was actually been written by Philip Miller, who writes, "Passkeys have me befuddled." Amen, brother. When they first emerged, I took a wait-and-see approach, and that's where I remain today. Again, amen, brother. Even though many sites and services pressure me to adopt passkeys. Are all three of you fully embracing passkeys now? What are the biggest pitfalls what are the biggest benefits of passkeys for someone like me, who's a faithful user of tools like 1Password for managing traditional passwords and two-factor codes? What are the real risks of passkeys? Am I being foolish to worry about scenarios where my Apple devices are all lost in a house fire? Now I'm locked out of every account. With 1Password, everything is backed up in the cloud, and I can keep my emergency logging credentials on a single sheet of paper in a safe deposit box. Are passkeys equally resilient? And I will also add a fourth question. What about family passwords? My understanding is that you can share passkeys, or maybe not originally, but certainly now. But there's a lot of stuff that, one of the great things about 1Password is that it has family vaults, or you can get a family account with a family vault where, Aaron and I will share a bunch, if not most of our passwords. So I know nothing about this, even though I should. I don't know, Marco, if you have thoughts on this, and let's start with you if so, but I'd very much like to hear John's perspective as well.
I have some thoughts, and then we'll kick it to John, who will have the right answers. The way I've embraced passkeys is when a website asks me, hey, you want to make a passkey? It's much better, blah, blah, blah. I will usually at that point say yes and do my fingerprint or whatever. I have also found that as I am still bouncing between Apple Passwords and 1Password, although more 1Password these days, since I'm still using Chrome as my default desktop browser, the way both of them handle passkeys is fine. With Apple, you go to a website, if it wants a passkey, it'll show you the standard like Touch ID, Face ID prompt, and you authenticate that way, and it gets you in. With 1Password, if you have the browser extension, it just if it's unlocked already, it'll just show a little thing in the upper right corner, and it's like, you want to use the passkey? Click to log in. You click to log in, and it logs you in. Both of those are fine. The 1Password one is, I think, a little more convenient, of just providing the security in a different way, but they're both fine. My main issue with passkeys is that it's kind of like that old XKCD comic that's like, we have too many standards. Here, I made a new standard. From a technical and security perspective, they're amazing. They're way better than everything we had before. But from the actual user experience of using them in practice most of the time, it's just another thing that gets added to the pile of things that we are supposed to keep track of and, have in a password manager or something, and try to share maybe with mixed success with family members or coworkers or whatever. It can be done very well. In an ideal implementation of passkeys, both on the platform side and on the website side, they're better than everything else. The main downside with passkeys so far is that the way that I see them being implemented by websites and services is not as a replacement for passwords, but as a replacement for two-factor. So it's actually just taking this other complex thing and replacing it with a different complex thing. Now, the security of a passkey is way better than, most of those other systems or alternatives to it. But the user experience of it is still really clunky in a lot of places. And ideally, it would replace the entire login. Like, ideally, you could just have it like automatically, if you have a passkey for the site you're on and it shows you a login screen, it just prompts you to use it and it logs you in all the way. That would be the ideal case. And you occasionally see sites like that, but it's not the common case. So that's kind of my kind of mixed opinion of them, is that they are a great technology that solves a lot of problems. They also create a lot of inconvenience in certain contexts, and they are not really making logins on websites that much easier in practice, not because of their inherent technology, but because of the implementation decisions of those websites.
Yeah, I've really come around on passkeys for the past 6 months or so. I was always trying them out whenever they were offered or whatever, but now having implemented them, or having asked coding agents to implement them for me, more precisely, and seeing all the details there and all the different trade-offs and everything, I still think implementing them is the most annoying part of passkeys, because if they want to get better adoption on websites and stuff, they should really, streamline that and work harder to give like friendly libraries that are easy to use with good documentation. Casey. But anyway, the coding agents can do it, so it's not that bad. But just a quick review, like what's good about passkeys, why would you want to use them instead of passwords or whatever? They have a bunch of security advantages that passwords and two-factor stuff are never going to be able to match, just because they're inherent in the technology. The first is that when you use a password on a website, the server stores something on its side that could potentially compromise you. You hope they don't just store your password in plain text, but as we've seen, some websites do that. And you have no way of knowing if the website is incompetent and is storing your passwords in plain text. So there's that. Second, so let's say they don't store it in plain text. Let's say they store an encrypted hash of your password, or what they should be doing. What algorithm are they using for it? Has the algorithm been broken? Was the algorithm secure 10 years ago, but now it's not anymore? And all this is relevant because websites get hacked, and what people leak from them is account information, which is usually your email address, which whatever, people don't like that to leak, but your email address is not a secret. But also some hashed thing for your password. And you're like, well, that's secure. They can't get my password from that, can they? Well, again, what algorithm are they using? Maybe they can't get it now, but 3 years from now, they'll be able to do it with some NVIDIA GPU or something that can crack it. Passkeys do not store secret information on the server. Again, you're assuming that they're implemented in a sane way, but I can tell you that passkeys don't involve the server storing something that is secret. What the servers store is public information. They store your public key. It is anyone can have it. It's not a secret. You can give it to the world. And they use that to verify through this protocol that you're being signed in or whatever. So if a website gets hacked, the only thing they can leak about you is your email address, which again, I don't think is actually secret, because spammers just spam every email address in the entire world. They just go through every combination of letters and numbers. Anyway, so that's good. Second thing is, you don't have to make a human decision about where to enter something like a two-factor code or a password. You're not involved in that process. The passkey system has the computer do that for you. Yes, you're still vulnerable to like DNS poisoning or something else, but the point is, social engineering is how people get hacked. They throw up something in front of them that looks like a web page for the website they're familiar with, and they just blindly enter their password in there. And yes, password managers like 1Password, which by the way is a current and former sponsor. And the reason we recommend them is you should be using a password manager because they will automate a lot of this for you. But you can always manually, and people know how to do it because they're like, oh, I don't, the password autofill is not working or whatever. And people learn you can right click and do autofill, I've seen even technically non-savvy people go find their password in whatever their password thing is, usually Apple passwords or whatever, and copy and paste it into a text field. People do that today because they have to, because it doesn't, autofill isn't everywhere, or they don't know you can right click and autofill on the Mac and recent versions of macOS. So they make human decisions about where to put things like their two-factor code and their password, which is why every two-factor code comes with an all caps screaming at you saying, don't show this to anybody. We'll never ask you for your two-factor, because it's so insecure. People get social engineered all the time. Passkeys will never make you make a decision about where to put things. It's automated based on the identity of the server as verified by TLS, blah, blah. Again, DNS poisoning and man in the middle and stuff like that. That's outside the scope. But the point is that will obviously work with all the other password systems as well. But they don't ask you to make that decision. So this whole realm of social engineering is eliminated because humans don't literally can't, and don't decide where to put their credentials. And that prevents you from screwing yourself when you get like phished or whatever, and you think it's a regular login screen. And then finally, they're secure. I think this is one of the big advantages that starts to shade into the social, which is for most accounts these days, like if it's something important, it's like, okay, you have a username and you have a good, generated, long, complicated password that's stored in a password manager of your choosing, right? And also a second factor to make it even more secure. And that second factor, sometimes they make it do SMS, which is incredibly insecure, and websites demand that you do it, but a lot of places will let you use an authenticator app like Apple Passwords or Authy or 1Password or a million other apps that are better than SMS, and they'll do that, the 6-digit code or whatever. And they need those two factors because there's so many other vulnerabilities in terms of phishing and getting your password cracked and reusing passwords and all sorts of stuff like that they need a second factor. Passkeys are secure enough that you don't need a second factor. And nothing drives me more crazy than having to log in a 2-step process. I don't want to get an email and enter code and do a thing. Even on sites where I have a password, they insist on like mailing me a login. Like, it's like, well, what's the point of me having a password? Like, just let me pick what I want to log in with. But multiple steps are annoying, which is why when I did all my personal sites, I use passkeys only, because it is a 1-step login process. There's no second screen after you log in with a passkey where it should ask you for a 2-factor. Now, to Marco's point, lots of websites say, oh no, we're gonna use the passkeys as a second factor, or we're gonna make you passkey login and then ask you for an SMS code. It's like, why? So there's a learning curve there, but the potential is, because they are secure enough for all the reasons that I said before, they can be the only factor which simplifies login. So every website, every web service that I use that lets me only use a passkey to log in, I'm like, thank you. This is the way it should work. And there's not many of them, and it's taking a long time, but I see progress. I mean, hell, ATP.fm does it now. You can choose to use a password, a passkey, or neither one of those, or an email login. Like, you can do all those things. Now, there's still the question of like, okay, but if you can do email resets for forgot password, doesn't that make passkeys less secure? Blah blah blah. I'm like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Passkeys are. To answer the first question, are you embracing them? I am embracing them to the extent that websites will let me. I'm embracing it with the websites that I maintain, that I build for myself, for my little toy things. And every time they are there, I always use them. And I, don't like it when they're not the only factor to log in, but they can be. They can be, and I feel good about them being that. And you can share them. With like Apple Passwords, you can have family passwords and passkeys and stuff like that. And it's good about, and 1Password did the same deal. And it's good about, like, most of the browsers are good these days when you log in. It's like, well, what if I have more than one passkey to a website? It will let you pick. And, they're identified by like email address or username or whatever. So you can have multiple passkeys to a website, and it's, everything's great. And in terms of like the failure scenario, losing stuff, like the name 1Password, again, current and former sponsor, you can have 1Password that you actually remember to unlock your password vault. Same thing with iCloud Keychain, Apple's password manager. Maybe that's the 1Password that you should actually memorize and have it be complicated. Don't have it be simple, because that is sort of the keys to the kingdom there. What if your house is on fire? What if you lose all your devices? What if you're on vacation and your phone falls into the ocean? What am I going to do? This is one of the complaints I hear about passkeys. Is like, I can't just write it down like a password. I can't just print out a piece of paper with a password on it and have it there. Well, first of all, you can write down your like Apple ID password, which is the keys to your, iCloud keychain. You can write down your 1Password password and put it in a safe deposit box or whatever. So you can do that. But second of all, most sites, even if they do like passkey as your only login, will also give you backup codes, which is like, print these out, and in case of fire, like, put these in a safe deposit box in a remote location on a piece of paper. And a lot of them will force you to prove that you wrote them down somewhere by asking you to enter them or whatever later. You only see them once and you're never going to see them again. Those are your like lifelines. It's not you like people like, I want to see my passkey. I want to see the giant base 64, like the passkey systems hide that from you as much as possible. And the reason they hide it is not because they're trying to like lock you in or whatever. The reason they hide it is because they never want a user to be able to get at that, because if users can get at that, people will phish it. People will say, oh, we're having trouble with our passkey login. Go grab your private key from your password manager and paste it into this text field, and people will do it. So that's why they make it basically impossible for a regular person to get at that data. But websites with accounts almost, especially if they're important and they're technically decent, almost always have backup codes. print out your backup codes, store them off-site somewhere, have multiple copies of them in physically secure locations. So if everything burns down and you lose every single one of your devices, and you're like, how am I going to restore my digital world? Backup codes is the answer. And also email-based password resets. But if you really get hacked or something and you can't get your email, backup codes are the answer. So yeah, I'm enthusiastic about passkeys. I was less enthusiastic when they first rolled out, but again, like I said, now having implemented them a few times and using them more, every time I find a site that uses one, like, yes, more of this, just this one thing and nothing else, and I feel good about them.
All right. Well, it sounds like I'm going to need to start embracing them then.
I mean, you probably already are, but it's like Marco said, what if the site you use makes you use it as a second factor or some BS like that? You just have to wait, or maybe send them an email and say, hey, I wish you did something different.
Yeah. John Fabridius writes, do you think that the 8 gigs of RAM constraint in the MacBook Neo helps keep or make macOS lean, a self-imposed limitation that can prevent lazy bloat, or is the iOS team cursing the hardware cost-cutting people? Well, probably a little of both, right? I don't know. I will say that I'm friends with a handful of Apple engineers, and without disclosing, and they've never told me anything secret, but without like blowing up their spot or anything, I will say that all of them talk about perf or performance a lot. Like, just, I've been working on some perf stuff lately, and that's all they'll ever tell me. It's never anything more than that. But I hear that not infrequently. And if you think about it, if things perform well, and maybe not specifically around RAM, but if things perform well, that can also reduce like battery drain and strain and so on. So maybe John's got a point here, but I think Apple just genuinely really cares about this stuff, irrespective of the fact that they have low RAM devices still floating around in the world.
Yeah, I think the main thing to keep in mind here is that when you look at where RAM goes on a Mac, macOS is not what you have to worry about. What you have to worry about is all the third-party apps, especially apps that use things like the web frameworks like Electron and stuff like that. So you have Chrome itself. Chrome is a big resource hog compared to Safari in most ways, and then all of the Electron-based apps, they just gobble up RAM like crazy. There's not a lot Apple can do about that, really. The OS does its best, but for the most part, that's what you have to worry about. And now, that being said, when you look at when you're designing an app like that, you look at the installed base of what people actually use, and if computers that many people use are going to run that kind of app very slowly and it's going to bloat their computers up, you don't care because the entire industry doesn't care. And you just have to suck it up as the user. You want to think that they would look at the entire field of computers out there and be like, should we maybe not use all the RAM in the world? Should we maybe put a second of effort into not duplicating this thing over here? Nope. No one thinks that way at all. No one pays attention. Not a single software developer ever cares about that kind of stuff when making things like various Electron apps and things like that. So Apple does care a lot. No one else does. Yes, the 8 gig RAM constraint in the MacBook Neo keeps macOS lean, but macOS wasn't your problem. Your problem is everyone else, and they're going to do whatever they're going to do. And the best thing macOS can do is have really good swap and virtual memory support. And it does.
macOS can use a lot of memory, especially when things run away. But the real question is, and this was the question when the Neo came out when we were discussing it, if you're going to roll out a brand new computer in 2026 with 8 gigs of RAM, how long will macOS run on that computer? Because that's the question. I don't think Apple will feel constrained to keep macOS lean because they need it to run on the Neo. I think they'll decide based on wherever macOS is going, how long the Neo will be supported. And I'm sure it'll be supported for years because not being able to run on the Neo, you can't even boot macOS with 8 gigs. No, it's fine. You'll always be able to boot it whatever. But there is a certain point where maybe they'll add some feature to macOS 31 or something. They'll be like, well, this feature, we just can't fit it in the Neo. And at that point, the Neo will no longer run macOS 31. 30 will be the last one that'll run. But I'm just making up numbers. But that will happen. And I think because the Neo has so little RAM, it is definitely in danger of being the first line of Macs to be dropped from a software revision. obviously, like with the processor transition, like the Intel ones get dropped or whatever, but just look at like Apple's support, like how far back they go on the MacBook Pros for various versions of macOS versus the MacBook Airs versus the Minis and stuff like that. Apple will drop hardware when it becomes unfeasible given their software plans. And so I don't think Apple will feel constrained by the Neo, and I think there is the potential for the Neo to fall off the end of the supported list longer than, let's say, its contemporary M5 MacBook Air with 16 gigs. I think that one will last longer than the Neo for multiple reasons. So, yeah, I'm not optimistic about Apple feeling constrained by the RAM size. And I don't know if software people are cursing Apple's hardware choices, but I have to think some of them have to, because it's like you have all these grand vision, and when we got the big Apple intelligence dividend where all the Macs went to 16 gigs, it's like finally we broke out of that 8 gig jail and we fell back into it. I'm not slamming the Neo for it because it makes sense on the Neo, like I understand that, but one of the things that is going to hold back, especially this first gen Neo, is it arrives at a time where 8 gig is especially with the RAM crisis and everything, it arrives at a time where 8 gig it's the only choice for that machine, given the prices and given the current RAM scenarios. Like it could have been way worse. And currently 8 gig is a little bit under what you would want from even a low end machine, but it is what it is. Now, when the next one comes out, presumably with 12 and the A19 Pro in it, 12 is a little bit better. It would be better if this one had 12, but it doesn't. Like I feel like if Apple continues to use the A series chips and does not adjust their A series chips to be up to 16, like to try to keep, because it's possible they'll do that, because we all know the Macs get stuck at the base RAM for way too long. And right after the base RAM on the Macs gets bumped, that's the best time ever. And as time goes on, we all love the MacBook Air has 16 gigs of RAM. In 10 years, we're all going to be complaining that the MacBook Air has 16 gigs of RAM in the base model, because Apple just does not change the base RAM to keep up with the times. And so there's that curve they're going to walk. Is it the case that the A series chips will just eventually hit 16 and stay there? Is it the case that the A series chips will end up with 18 while the Macs still have 16 because the phone just outraces them because the Mac stays static for so long? We'll see how that turns out down there. But we're currently in a situation where the A series has half of what the base Macs have. And that's probably the worst. I imagine the worst it will ever be. And I'm hoping that gap will narrow as Apple, again, if Apple keeps doing the A series chips on these, I think they'll start designing the A series chips for the 3 years from now with the Mac in mind for peripherals like USB and stuff like that. And maybe, we'll reach RAM parity there. So yeah, I'm not optimistic about the positive effects of the 8 gig RAM in the Neo. I just think that maybe we have better RAM days to look forward to in the future.
Finally, Keith Heaton writes, how long until we see an iPhone with an M chip or an iPad Pro with the ability to plug into a Thunderbolt dock or a studio display and present macOS to you? I just know that a Mac inside your pocket will eventually happen. Michael Cook writes, does the MacBook Neo now mean that Apple will likely never allow the iPhone to plug into a monitor and be used like a computer the way you can with an iPad or a Samsung DeX, DEX? I think this would be awesome, except I don't think it would be as awesome as I think it would. And I really just don't see Apple doing it. I think having this mythical dual boot or dual mode iPad would be incredible, but I just really don't see Apple doing it. I mean, they're steadfastly refusing mostly to allow windowing on iPad OS. I know obviously that's different now, but they certainly steadfastly refused it for years. I just don't see this happening. And I don't think it really has anything to do with MacBook Neo. I just don't think this is Apple's style.
It's incoherent from a software message. Technically possible, sure, but it's Apple seems not to, and I kind of agree with them, make
toaster fridges,
Jekyll and Hyde kind of devices where it runs two different OSs. Yeah, sure, you could do that from a technical perspective, but it's weird that it's a phone when it's in your hand, but it's a Mac when it's not, and how to synchronize the world of the phone and the Mac with each other. And obviously you're taking up more disk space, and you kind of need to have power being supplied when you're hooked up to the monitor too, because otherwise it'll drain your phone battery. And it's a weird product to pitch, even though this is exactly what I pitched in one of my early Macworld Backpage articles, which was a laptop with a screen that folds back on itself. And when you fold it back, it runs iPad OS, because those are the pieces available at the time. And it's an interesting idea, but Apple never took us up on it. I think what people mostly are looking for here is either they just want like an ultra portable, like Mac-like experience that goes everywhere with them, and like maybe the folding phone will help with that or whatever. Or they really what they just want is like, wherever I go, I want my whole setup with me. And they're just, what they're asking for, I think, is what Apple would hopefully deliver, well, I don't know, over the years, is a better cloud sync experience. Like, because that's the way this is done, like in the Google world, for example. Wherever you go with your Google account, if you're tied into the Google world, there's all your stuff. You got your mail, you got your Google Photos, you got your Google Drive, you got your Google Docs. Like, it doesn't really matter where you land, all your stuff is there, whether it's a phone or tablet or whatever. And if you have that experience, and if that's working well, you don't need to plug your phone into a monitor. All you need is to be able to just like log into a guest account on that monitor thing and just get all your stuff and use it kind of like more like a thin client or whatever. But yeah, I just think this is a product choice that Apple doesn't want to make. And like I said, I kind of agree with them because it's just weird to run iOS and macOS off the same device. Setting aside the amount of disk space you're wasting and having to divide it up or whatever, it's not an efficient use of resources, and it's a difficult product to explain to people. And it's a difficult product for people to, like, if you had this and you used it, you'd be like, yeah, but it is kind of weird that I run macOS and then I run the iPhone OS, and the only place they sync is through this sipping straw of like iCloud stuff. And it's just, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of product that it sounds like a fun, interesting idea, but I think the reality of it would be weird and would disappoint people. And Apple is pretty good, in most cases, Vision Pro, from keeping products out of the market that would end up that way. All right, thank you to our sponsors this episode, Babble On, Squarespace, and DeleteMe. And thanks to our members who support us directly. You can join us at atp.fm/join. One of the many perks of membership is ATP Overtime, our weekly bonus topic. This week in Overtime, we're going to be talking about how Apple is going to add touch support to macOS. Speaking of which, so this will play right into what we were just talking about here. There's been a new Gurman report. We're going to be talking about that in Overtime. You can join us to listen, atp.fm/join. Thank you, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Mastodon, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
So I've been, I don't know if quiet quitting is really the right term of art/phrase for what I've been doing, but I've been, for lack of a better way of describing it, quiet quitting my Synology. I still, in and of itself, I still actually really do love my Synology. I have a DS 1621 Plus, I believe. If I can, I'll put a link in the show notes, but I don't think it's made anymore, so I may or may not be able to find a good link, but I'll put something in there. But I have been working on trying to set myself up to have the Synology go away and be okay with it. Now, I would still need a giant ass array of disks because I have a gazillion files. I think I have something like 10 to 15 terabytes worth of stuff, of active like stuff on the Synology, and then another like, and about that much again in free space at the moment. But I've really been disappointed with the path that Synology has been going recently, which, if you squint, doesn't look that different than Apple services. It's a different application, but looks kind of similar. But that's neither here nor there. But
I mean, that's probably not a coincidence. Like, Apple inspires companies how to become gatekeepers to make more money.
Right. That's exactly it.
Because Apple's really good at that.
Right. And honestly, that is the executive summary of what I'm about to tell you, which is that, a couple of years back, and we talked about it on the show, but a year or two back, they said, okay, all future Synology, NAS's disk stations, as they call them, they will be forced to use first-party Synology hard drives, which are themselves, relabeled like Western Digital's, I think, or something like that. The details honestly don't matter. Even if they are legitimately their own first-party drives, honestly, I don't think that really matters either. But this thing that was always and forever, you could put whatever drive you wanted in it, and they would slurp it up and it would be fine. But they've announced that, oh, no, you must use our first-party stuff. Now, in the defense of Synology, I can make some arguments in favor of that. It's far easier to control these things. It's far easier to guarantee that it'll work the way they want it to, and thus the way you want it to. Like, you can figure out legitimate reasons for this, but I feel like even though they are not taking it away from legacy users like myself, it's still gross, because at some point I'm going to want a new bit of network attached storage, and I don't want to have to fill that with very expensive Synology drives. In the same way that, all things being equal, I would put third-party RAM in a Mac, hi John, or, potentially a third-party SSD in a Mac, hello again John, if such a thing were possible in the Macs that I buy. But it isn't, not without, a ton of work. So I've been trying to set myself up for, all right, what would the future look like if I gave up on my Synology? And to be clear, I think this will happen, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I'm talking like maybe 5+ years before this happens. But I wanted to set myself up for it. And so what I've been doing is trying to treat the Synology less like a computer and more like a giant array of disks. And that's in no small part because I think what I am likely to replace the Synology with, if I were to do it tomorrow, is a almost it's Synology, is a Ubiquity UNAS, which is a giant array of disks, but it's very little else. I mean, obviously there is a computer in there, but not really from a user's perspective. By contrast, a Synology will let you can run a shell on it. Well, I mean, you can do that on the UNAS as well, I believe, but you can run stuff on it. You can install software on the Synology. You can run Docker containers on it. And I was running a zillion, like 10+ Docker containers on my Synology, which, by the way, even despite having added third-party RAM to my Synology as an add-on rather than a replacement, that didn't go exceedingly well because while this is a computer and it is meant to serve things, it's not really meant to be a server, if you ask me. And maybe, you listening might disagree with me, but that's kind of my perspective on it. It's supposed to do basic server-y stuff, but not be like your one server for your small business or for your home or whatever. And so what I've done is, I feel like I've talked about a little of this on the show, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but if you recall way back when, a year or two ago, I got a little tiny NUC, a little tiny Intel PC that I had shipped off to my dear friend in Connecticut with an antenna with the intention of streaming New York Giants games from Connecticut to me by slurping them up over the air. Apparently that's my word of the day. I'm sorry. By scooping them up from the air and using the absolutely excellent Channels app, sending them, sending what the antenna got into my house. That didn't end up working out because my friend lives far enough into the middle of nowhere, Connecticut, which is a thing, despite what you'd think, that his signal from his house was basically useless. And I had left the computer, the NUC, there for the longest time because, I don't know, there was no real need to repatriate it, for lack of a better word. But then it occurred to me, you know what? You know what a NUC would be really good at? Running a bunch of Docker containers. And so I realized my home lab experience is finally leveling up, and I need to do the thing that all self-respecting home labbers seem to do. And now I'm going to get all the home labbers yelling at me for saying so. But nevertheless, it seems like all of the home labbers that I know and respect, like my friend Alex, who's from Tailscale, who does incredible videos on the Tailscale channel about home lab stuff. So Tailscale on YouTube, that is. So anyway, Alex is a big fan of Proxmox, Proxmox, which I am not really well qualified to describe, but I would say is basically like an OS that lets you run VMs and LXCs, which is sort of kind of, but not really like a Docker container. Or, you can run a virtual machine that itself is basically its only purpose is to run Docker containers and so on and so forth. And so I repatriated the NUC. I put Proxmox on it. That's been working pretty well. It only had, I believe, stop me if this sounds familiar. When I bought it, I didn't buy it to do this sort of thing. I bought it to be a channel server. And so it only had 8 gigs of RAM on it, which once you start running 5, 10, 15, literally 20 Docker containers, and by the way, Home Assistant and Pi-hole, all on this device, I quickly found that 8 gigs of RAM was not sufficient. And so for the tune of like $180 or something like that, just a few weeks ago, I bought 16 gigs of RAM, which I think a year ago was like literally 30 or 40 bucks or something like that. But now it was something to the order of $150, which
on the spec front now, is the NUC more powerful than your Synology? Does it have more RAM? Is the CPU better?
I believe the CPU is better. It's a fair question to which, honestly, I don't know the answer. I have to assume yes. And I can tell you, based on the behavior of the NUC and the way these containers run on the NUC, it is way faster. Way faster.
How much RAM does your Synology have with the upgrade? Do you remember?
I want to say it's the same. I want to say it's 16 gigs, and I will try to look that up as I continue to talk.
Obviously, Synology is doing other things because it's doing disk serving stuff. But I do wonder, like, you're like, you really shouldn't use your Synology as your home server, so I bought the smallest, tiniest, least powerful computer I could get that's not a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, actually, now that I think about it, maybe the crux of my problem, which didn't occur to me until just this very moment, is that there is literally no storage on my Synology that is not a spinning platter. I don't have any sort of SSD on my Synology in any way, shape, or form.
Oh, yeah. No, will definitely make your Docker containers go slow.
No, that's very true. And so perhaps maybe that was it. But even if that is it, I still stand by, I want to try to do what I can to get myself in a position that if I decide to leave Synology behind, I'll be okay.
On that front, by the way, we should note that we had this story on a show a while back, but the Synology partially reversed its decision on the hard drives, and they only do it on the enterprise ones now, and the consumer ones, you can put any drive you want on them or whatever. We talked about it in the past, but like I
meant to bring that up, and I apologize.
They walked it back a little bit, but your point stands is that A, they did it in the first place, and B, they didn't undo all of it.
Right, exactly. And I apologize. I meant to say that and I got myself sidetracked. So thank you for bringing that up. Total physical memory on the Synology, 20 gigabytes. So a bit more than the NUC, actually. And maybe it is as simple as an SSD, but like I said, I stand by going down this path just to see what my future would be like. And truth be told, I think for the most part, it's gone really well. It was a disaster at first when I still had 8 gigs of RAM and was running, 15 or so containers. That was not great. But once I put in the 16 gigs, and I don't think this particular NUC supports more than that, and certainly it'll cost a second mortgage to get more than that, but this seems to be fine for now. And I am currently running, let's look at Portainer. I am running, something like 22 containers on it of all various shapes and sizes. Most of them are very small. A couple of them are not as small. And in addition to Home Assistant, in addition to Pi-hole, and it's been working great. And I'm really, really happy with it. Proxmox has a bit of a learning curve, but it's also really good. There's a listener to the show whose name is escaping me. I'm so sorry. I don't have it in front of me, but I will link their website. I believe I brought him up earlier. He has a bunch of really great information about Proxmox and Home Assistant and these sorts of home labby things. So I will put his website into the show notes as well. But between all these things and between Alex's, tutorials on YouTube, I've been able to stand up this little Proxmox node. I have now decommissioned every single one of my Raspberry Pis. The one in the garage got decommissioned a couple of years ago because there's a Home Assistant integration for my garage door opener, so I didn't need that anymore. The one in the bedroom, I should back up. The one in the office was running Pi-hole and little else. That got decommissioned once the Pi-hole moved to the NUC. And then finally, the one in the bedroom was running the little LED attached to my bed, and that got decommissioned for an ESP32 dev board that's running ESP Home. So that's driving the LED, which I presume takes even less power than the Pi Zero that was previously running it. So I'm really, believe it or not, mostly simplifying my life in terms of computing equipment. And so at this point, I feel like if I were to leave Synology's ecosystem behind, I think the only thing I would really miss is Synology Drive, which is the kind of faux Dropbox that I use. And I've talked about this on and off over the years. But one of the great things about the Synology Drive application is that not only does it, you are your own cloud, which for me in this context is a feature, not a bug. I could make an argument in the opposite. But one of the great things about it is you can use Synology's, I think it's Cloud Sync, to take your Dropbox and basically put that inside your Synology Drive. So when I want to upload like the file that I'm recording right now to Marco for him to process later, I don't have Dropbox running on any of my computers, and I haven't for like 5+ years. I simply put it into the Dropbox folder within my Synology Drive and in the appropriate folder in my Dropbox in the drive, root, and it will go ahead and sync that to Dropbox's cloud so that then Marco can pull it down. And that's worked incredibly well. I think I can replicate that with some open source stuff. It isn't quite as slick and it isn't quite as nice, but the combination of, what was it? Sync Thing and something else. I forget what the other one was. rclone. Sync Thing and rclone. The two of them put together, if you squint, are kind of sort of what Synology Drive and Synology Cloud Sync does. And I did trial that like a year or so ago, and it did do the trick. Like I said, I don't love it quite as much as I like Drive, but at this point, I am in a position where I think I can divorce myself of the Synology and be okay. And at that point, Marco, we're going to have to figure out what the VibraSlap is used for.
Oh, we might have to get a new sound for you, because speaking of spinning disks in your Synology, it made me think when you were rattling off all the things that you've consolidated onto this NUC. How are you backing this NUC up?
It's funny you bring that up. There is, what is it called? Proxmox Backup Server, PBS, I believe, where it has its own mechanism for doing this. And basically all of that is going onto the Synology. Because the reason I ask is because like you have so much set up there, like the time you invested into setting up those 20 containers and consolidating everything, and it's not redundant storage like the Synology spinning disks, the old cruddy Rust that presumably you're not using RAID 0 on the whole thing, I hope. So you have some hardware redundancy. Oh, what if the SSD goes bad? What if a kid spills a drink on it or whatever? Do you want to reset up your entire life on that NUC, or do you want to restore from a backup? And then the question is where you put the backup, and as you noted, it's on the Synology, so you may not be out of the woods yet. No, but that is actually one of the only things that the Synology is still doing other than Drive that would be hard to replace. I would probably have to do something else because
you can do a cloud backup or whatever. It's just a question of like making sure it's some automated process so you actually are protected, because one of the things the Synologies have going for them is that if a drive fails, you're protected. If 2 drives fail, maybe not.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I have no reasonable way to contest what you're saying. And that thought has crossed my mind. The good news is a lot of this stuff, not all of it, but a lot of these containers, let's just say, as long as I have the Docker Compose somewhere, which I do, I have that in a private GitHub repo, most of this I could stand up again pretty easily. And most of what these containers emit, this is not everything that I do with containers, but a lot of it, most of what these containers emit is stored on the Synology anyhow. And it's one of those things, if you know, you know.
Someone in the chat room mentioned R2, and you mentioned rclone. And for some of the stuff that I did for my private websites, I ended up using R2 because it's part of Cloudflare, and it's their S3 replacement. But Transmit, my favorite file transfer client, does not talk to R2 for some obscure technical reason. I think they don't do chunk transfer encoding or something. Anyway, I couldn't use Transmit, so I had to find a nice app to a GUI app and then a command line app because rsync doesn't work with it and transmit doesn't work with it. So I ended up using rclone for the command line because rclone will talk to R2. And I'm using Forklift, which is a Mac file transfer app that's been around for a while. I wonder if their name is a play on the transmit truck. But anyway, Forklift exists and it also talks to R2. So I guess this is an endorsement for rclone, which is, I mean, I really feel like rsync should get support for R2, but R2 is a little bit of it's S3, but the letter is one lower and the number is one lower, and it's almost compatible with everything, but not my favorite apps and not my favorite command line tool. So I'm glad rclone exists, and I'm glad Forklift exists.
Yeah, I had not heard of Forklift before. That's interesting.
It's pretty old. It's been around for a long time. CyberDuck also works with it. Someone mentioned that. I use CyberDuck as well. I liked Forklift a little bit better. So
I don't use R2 for backing up the Synology. I have other means for that I'd rather not discuss here. But part of the reason I don't use anything to back up the Synology, anything like that to back up the Synology, is because it's something like 15 terabytes, and that is prohibitively expensive. Even like the what is it, Ice or something like that? There's the
Glacier.
That's what I'm thinking of.
I use Backblaze B2 to back up my Synology, and it's not that. I don't have as much data as you, but it's not that bad.
It's bad enough for me that I can't stomach it, but I'm also frugal as hell. So what do you expect? But no, I've been really, really happy with this. It's been thanks to the unnamed listener. I want to say his name is Derek. I'm so sorry. I will put a link in the show notes though, who had helped me a lot, but in terms of his website, which is excellent. And in terms of, actually some kind of personal email support, which was very kind of him. I have sent him some ATP stickers as a thank you. Don't worry. But that and, Alex on Tailscale's YouTube channel has really, really opened my eyes into a different way of approaching this. And I'm actually really, really happy with it. Now, ask me again when this poops itself tomorrow and I lose everything. But sitting here now, it's been going really, really well, and I'm really happy with it. And if I decide to get rid of the Synology and go a different route entirely, like in UNAS, I think I am mostly ready to do that, leaving aside, transferring all this data and so on and so forth.